I'm a little late on this topic, but now I'm also going to make a wedgie sled for the segments of rings for segmented wood turning, for example like this little bowl here. One of the big challenges in making something like this is to cut the segmented rings. And the difficulty there is to cut the angle here between the joint surfaces exactly right. Most often it will happen that there's a gap like here or here, and that will show in the final bowl. And you definitely don't want that. There of course are some workarounds to avoid these gaps, but they are mostly time consuming and well then you have to do 2 glue ups for just one ring. But with a wedgie sled you can cut these perfectly every time. And for the wedgie sled I want to build, I changed the design slightly so that it can also double function as a miter sled, and you can use it for something like picture frames or, well, mainly picture frames as well. The base of the sled is a piece of MDF which conveniently appears at the exact right moment on my table saw with the correct dimensions. Cool. Next I need to cut the slots into the base, and because I'm lazy, or well, it's convenient for me, I'm using my CNC for that. But it's also really simple to do this without a CNC, with just a router and a circle jig.
You can find a link to the original building plan from Jerry Bennett in the video description. Routing into MDF always leaves a burr on the edge, which is very simple to remove with a knife.
And now our carriage bolts can ride along these slots.
Unfortunately, a round router bit doesn't cut square. Time for a file.
Next come the fences, which usually are also made out of MDF, but something much more substantial would be polyethylene. I got this piece from a factory as a waste piece for free, and well, this is, I think, perfect for this job.
I trimmed one edge straight and then cut them to the biggest size possible.
Now somehow nobody really mentioned this yet, but for this jig it's extremely critical that these fences are perfectly parallel to each other. So after you've cut them you should measure both ends and compare them. And it seems like that I'm about 1/10 of a millimeter off. And this one is pretty good. Actually, it's perfect. This one needs a really shallow trim cut. Now it's perfect.
Then I could drill the first mounting holes, and drilling into polyethylene is so cool. It cuts like butter and leaves nice shavings.
To locate the other hole position, I just half assemble the jig, like so. And with a breadpoint drill bit, I can put this in the slot and then scratch onto the fence. And that leaves a tiny scratch on the fence. I'm also chamfering the edges because they are really sharp. Now you can see it assembled and working. And this is what it looks like from behind. To make it nice and comfortable to tighten the nuts, I made a few knobs. Now I just have to insert the remaining nuts.
You can also find a cutting template for knobs like these in the description.
One important thing about these knobs is that they are smaller than the fences wide, so that when you're working with stock higher than the fences, they can't interfere. Next I need to make the guide bar for the T-track slot, and since I have it, I'm again using polyethylene. Almost perfect. Just need to remove a little bit in the middle. Now this is a pretty decent fit and it doesn't slide, which is good because of my sliding table. As it's not super critical how square this jig is to the blade, I just butt it up against the fence. And I set the fence so it slightly overhangs the saw curve. Now I can mark where the guide bar is supposed to be attached. This one I need to tighten by hand. Now I can drop it into the slot and then line it up with the fence again. Now I can slide it out of the slot and screw down the other end. And now I can trim cut it and make it zero clearance with the blade. As a miter sled, this jig would be already finished. And to use it, you would just open both fences and then put something square in it, like so. Then tighten it. Make sure that the square has absolutely no play in here. And that means that from here to here it's square, and from here to here it's square. And as an example, I have two pieces of scrapwood. When you work with stock that fits in between here, you can use the inside surfaces, but otherwise, just use the outside surfaces.
It's important to use one fence for one piece and the other fence for the other piece.
And this joint will be as square as the reference square is, and in this case, it's perfect. And this is the whole principle of this jig. You could also say that with this setup, you make rings with 4 segments. And as they are square, they tend to be pretty practical for picture frames. And when I set the jig up with this part of the square, which is 45 degrees, I get a ring with 8 segments. So all you really need is something that represents the perfect angle with which you can set the jig up. But the problem there is where to get these. One option would be to buy them. The guy who came up with this sells these so-called wedgies. That's also why this is called the Wedgie Sled on his website, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. You could also cut them out yourself with the CNC. But as probably most people won't have access to one, I came up with another solution. Basically, we are making an adjustable one of these. This is the template for it, and if you're interested in making one yourself, you can find a link in the description where you can download it for free. With this template, you can make a wedgie for literally any number of segments you would like. I already drew lines for the most common segment numbers, and now let's say we want to make a wedgie for 18 segments. That means we follow this line here, which brings us here. That means we have to cut the rough shape out here. This line needs to be cut out exactly. All you need is a piece of plywood with one straight edge, and you will line it up with the edge of the template.
When cutting it out, you don't need to be super precise because it gets fine-tuned anyways. For the cam, punch the whole location before cutting it out. It should also be cut out relatively exactly and sanded to the line. You will also need another small strip of plywood with one straight edge.
Now you need to make the pivoting piece about parallel with the cut line. Then take the cam levers so the handle faces up and screw it down. Screw it down quite firmly so that it sits pretty tight, but you can still move it by hand. And with this cam lever you can now precisely adjust the angle. So now to use it and fine tune it, put the cam lever back into the middle position and set the jig up with it.
Here you can also see how to use the jig. You always reference off of one edge of your stock and switch between the fences as shown. There's no need of flipping the piece around, so one big source of angle errors got eliminated.
I sanded off all the little burrs and now I can put it together to a ring and see if there are any gaps. Now as you can see, the angles are not perfect and there are gaps. They are on the inside. And that tells me that the angle of the segments is too big or too steep. So now I need to adjust the wedgie a little bit. maybe by this amount, and make another test ring. If the gap would be on the outside, then you just adjust in the other direction. Alright, on the fourth attempt I finally got it right, and now I know that this wedgie is perfectly set up for 18 segments. To make sure that it will stay perfect, you could either screw it down, but I would prefer to glue it down. Kind of lift it up and turn it back into position. When you shift the contact surfaces of spring clamps like so, then it will also apply a little bit of forward pressure, so it presses against the cam, and that's what you want here. Now you can even remove the cam lever and use it for the next one. One problem you might have already seen is that when you cut a segment, it always falls right next to the blade, which is not really safe. What most people do to avoid this problem is to make a zero clearance insert which has a little ramp next to the blade, so the segments fall down this ramp and are then away from the blade and can never touch it again. And I think I'm going to do exactly the same, except not a whole insert because that's kind of tricky for my table saw, but instead just a piece that I can attach to the insert.
I secured the ramp firmly so I can plunge cut through it.
Now the little ramp is finished, and as you can see it has various pins in it which hold it securely in the insert, and they are all there for a good reason. In the back the saw teeth are spinning upwards, and if for whatever reason they would catch on the ramp, they would throw it upwards and towards me, which would be terribly unsafe. So to prevent that, I installed this angled pin, and it hooks into the insert plate and holds it securely. In the front the saw teeth spin down, so no issue there, but they also spin forward, and if they catch the ramp, they could also shoot it towards me. So to prevent that, there's the second pin and the magnet, and they hold it securely. And as you can see, it's really simple and quick to install, safe during operation, and you don't even have to remove the riding knife, so no excuse for not using it.
Lastly, I changed the shape of one fence to make room for wider stock.
I also painted and varnished it a little bit to protect the MDF, and also drew a little reference scale on here, so that when I set the jig up, I set both fences up by roughly the same amount. And I also made a convenient storage place for it right on the lathe cabinet. So now I'm prepared for the next segment turning project, and till then, I'm a little late on this topic, but now I'm also going to make a wedgie sled for the segments, or crap. You could also cut them with a CNC, but And I also made a convenient storage place for it right on the lathe cabinet. Which doesn't work that well. Yeah.